So there I was, standing in the command center of Coalition Orbital Station Dreth, watching a sensor feed that should not have been possible. I was trying to explain to my commanding officer how 12 humans had just done what 3 of our finest battalions could not accomplish in 11 days of sustained engagement. My name is Saval, and I am a Yenthari, a species that has been mapping the geometry of war for 4,000 years. We invented the concept of combined arms doctrine. We wrote the equations that govern siege warfare. We have academies older than most species' written languages. So when I say that what I watched that day defied every model I had ever built, I want you to understand the weight of that statement. Let me start from the beginning. The Dreth were not supposed to be a problem we couldn't solve. They were an expansionist species, aggressive, territorial, and about as subtle as a collapsing star. But they were predictable. Every engagement followed patterns. Every pattern had a counter. We had been fighting them for 6 years, and while we were not winning comfortably, we were not losing catastrophically either. We were doing what the Yenthari do best, calculating, adapting, enduring. Then, the Dreth took Calliden Station. Calliden was not a military installation. It was a research hub. 4,000 scientists, engineers, and support personnel. Most of them non-combatants from 11 different coalition species. The Dreth did not destroy it. They occupied it. And they made very clear, through channels I will not describe in detail, what would happen to those 4,000 lives if the coalition attempted a rescue by conventional means. The High Council convened. Options were presented. Every model said the same thing. A direct assault would result in unacceptable civilian casualties. A siege would take too long. Negotiation had been attempted, and the Dreth had responded by sending back one of our envoys in a container that was, by any definition, too small for an intact person. That was when Admiral Taryn, who had been quiet for most of the session, said 4 words that changed everything. "We should call Earth." The room went very still. Now you have to understand something about how the Coalition viewed Earth at that point. They had been members for less than 2 standard years. Their technological base was, by our measures, charmingly primitive. Their starships were slow. Their energy weapons were inefficient. Their tactical doctrine was a chaotic patchwork of incompatible philosophies that had somehow, inexplicably, produced victories in their own interspecies conflicts. They had been admitted to the Coalition largely because they were enthusiastic, because they occupied a strategically useful region of space, and because their biology made them useful for environments most species found unpleasant. We did not think of them as a military power. We thought of them as a member state with a lot of energy and very little polish. I was sent to the coordination meeting as the senior tactical analyst. My job was to brief the human liaisons on the situation at Calliden, receive their assessment, and politely guide them toward whatever limited support role we had determined was appropriate for their capabilities. Commander Reyes was already in the room when I arrived. She was shorter than I expected. Most of the humans I had encountered before had been tall, broad-shouldered individuals, whose physical presence did most of their communicating for them. Reyes was compact, precise-looking, with dark hair pulled back in a way that seemed designed to remove any possible distraction from her eyes. Those eyes were doing something I had not seen in many species. They were reading the room, not scanning it casually, reading it. The tactical displays, the personnel, the exits, the sight lines, all of it, in about 3 seconds, before she had said a single word. She sat down across from me, folded her hands on the table, and said, "Brief me, not hello, not introductions, not the standard coalition diplomatic preamble that takes approximately 4 minutes and accomplishes nothing. Brief me." I briefed her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked one question. "How many of the 4,000 are capable of following simple instructions under stress?" I told her we estimated roughly 60% could remain functional in a crisis with proper guidance. She nodded, like I had just confirmed something she already suspected. "Okay," she said. "We'll need 12 people in 72 hours. My assistant, a young Pelthian analyst named Doss, made a sound beside me that I can only describe as involuntary. I kept my expression neutral, which was considerably more effort than it should have been. 12 people, 72 hours, to liberate a station held by approximately 300 Dreth soldiers, with 4,000 hostages, in the middle of a debris field that made conventional approach vectors catastrophically dangerous. I asked, with what I believed was admirable calmness, how she planned to accomplish this. Reyes looked at me the way a mathematician looks at someone who has just questioned whether addition works. "We go in through the debris field," she said. The Dreth aren't watching it because they don't think anyone can navigate it. 11 entry points, low thermal signature, timed insertions to avoid overlapping sensor windows. We hit the command node first, then the armory. Then we section the station into isolated zones before they can coordinate a response. Once command is down, the hostages become a logistical problem, not a tactical one. She paused, then added, "The Dreth rely heavily on centralized command authority. Remove the head and the body doesn't know what to do. They're not improvising fighters. They're executing orders. Stop the orders." The room was very quiet. Doss leaned toward me and whispered, "Did she just describe a plan to enter an unnavigable debris field, neutralize a fortified command structure, and liberate 4,000 hostages with 12 soldiers?" I whispered back, "Yes. Should we tell her that's impossible?" I looked at Reyes, who was calmly reviewing station schematics she had apparently obtained before the meeting began. "I don't think," I said slowly, "that she would find that information useful. We gave her the 12 people. We gave her 72 hours. Then we sat in the command center and watched the sensor feeds with the particular quality of attention that comes from not quite believing what you are seeing. The first indication that something was happening came 18 hours in, not 72. A single Dreth communication, fragmented, panicked, reporting contact in Sector 9 of the station. Then another from Sector 3. Then 4 more almost simultaneously from different locations, which should have been physically impossible given the distances involved and the number of humans reportedly in play. I called up the station schematics and spent several minutes trying to understand how 12 people could be generating contact reports from 6 different locations at the same time. Then, I understood. They weren't in 6 locations. They had made the Dreth believe they were. I will not claim I fully understood the specifics. The combination of decoys, timed communications jamming, and deliberate misdirection that Reyes and her team used was documented later in the after-action report, which I have read 4 times and still find incompletely explicable. But the effect was clear. The Dreth thought they were facing a coordinated assault from multiple directions. They pulled resources from the command node to respond, and the moment the command node was understaffed, 3 humans walked in through a maintenance access shaft and shut it down. That was hour 21. By hour 36, the armory was secure, and the Dreth garrison had been divided into isolated pockets with no communication and no coordination. By hour 60, 4,000 hostages were being evacuated to coalition ships. Not one of them had been harmed. The Dreth losses were significant. Coalition losses were 0. I met Reyes in the docking bay when she came off the rescue shuttle. She looked exactly the same as she had at the briefing. Same precise posture, same careful eyes. Not a single visible indication that she had spent 60 hours navigating a debris field and dismantling a fortified position with the functional equivalent of a very small, extremely focused strike team. I asked her if she had encountered any complications. She thought about it for a moment. Sector 7 had a secondary command relay we hadn't accounted for, she said. We had about 90 seconds to adapt. 90 seconds. To adapt to unexpected complications during a covert operation inside a hostile-controlled station. I asked what she had done with those 90 seconds. She told me. I will not describe it in detail because some of it I am still not entirely certain was physically possible, and I don't want this account to read as exaggeration. What I will say is that it involved one human, a maintenance corridor, and a willingness to do something that most tactical doctrines explicitly prohibit, because the calculations strongly suggest it should not work. It worked. The thing about Dreth, Reyes said, and I got the sense she was explaining something she considered very basic, is that they plan for what they think you'll do. They're not bad at it, but they plan for rational responses to rational problems. When you stop being rational, they don't have a framework for it. I asked her what she meant by rational. She looked at me with those reading eyes. Most species, when they're outnumbered and outgunned with no support, retreat or negotiate. The Dreth were expecting that. They weren't expecting us to look at those conditions and call them Tuesday. I thought about the 12 humans, the 60 hours, the 4,000 lives. I thought about the fact that Reyes had asked, as her very first question, how many of the hostages could follow simple instructions under stress, not because she was worried about them, but because she had already decided to use them as an element of the extraction. I thought about the 90 seconds in Sector 7, and what she had done with them, and why it had worked. Commander Reyes, I said, how long have you been doing this? She considered. Professionally? About 12 years. Before that, she paused, and something moved behind her eyes that I could not fully categorize. Earth has been at war with itself for most of recorded history. Most of us grew up watching it. Some of us grew up in it. She shrugged, one shoulder small. You don't have to train humans to operate in hostile conditions. We're already calibrated for it. You just have to point us in the right direction. I wrote that in my report. I wrote all of it in my report, along with a detailed tactical analysis of every decision Reyes and her team had made, and a section at the end that I spent 3 days trying to word correctly. The section was titled, "What We Misunderstood About Human Military Capability." The short version was this: we had evaluated humans on metrics we understood: physical strength, technological sophistication, doctrinal consistency, resource efficiency. On most of those metrics, they were average or below. We had missed the one metric that mattered most, the metric we did not have a name for, because we had never needed to measure it. Call it threshold tolerance. Call it operational flexibility. Call it the particular quality of mind that treats impossible situations as simply situations that require more creativity than usual. Other species, when pushed beyond the parameters of their training and experience, break. Not always physically, cognitively. The frameworks fail. The doctrine stops applying. The soldier stops being able to make good decisions because they are no longer in the universe their preparation assumed. Humans, it appeared, did not have this failure mode. Or rather, and this was the part I found most unsettling to write, they did have it, but the threshold was so far beyond normal operating parameters that we had never come close to finding it. Everything we had seen humans do in combat conditions, everything that looked like improvisation or recklessness or irrational aggression, was actually the output of a cognitive system forged across millennia of continuous, brutal, escalating conflict against the one enemy that knows exactly how you think: themselves. Other species had external enemies: predators, rival civilizations, environmental catastrophes. You learn from fighting things that are different from you, useful, but limited. Humans had spent their entire developmental history fighting humans. They had spent 8,000 years locked in an evolutionary arms race of trickery, strategy, resilience, and adaptation against opponents who had exactly the same cognitive architecture they did, who knew all the same tricks, who could anticipate all the same moves, who were always adapting. The result was a species that was, militarily, almost pathologically difficult to predict. Not because they were chaotic. Reyes had not been chaotic, not for a single second, but because their tactical instincts had been sharpened in a crucible nothing else in the galaxy could replicate. The Dreth were good at predicting what a cornered species would do. Humans were not irrational. They were simply operating on a pattern library built across 8,000 years of conflict that never stopped, never cooled, and never ran out of ways to get worse. The Dreth had never encountered anything like it. Neither had we. Admiral Terran read my report in one sitting. When he was done, he called me into his office and sat behind his desk for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, "How many of them are there?" 8 billion, I told him. Give or take. Another long silence. "The Dreth home system has been pushing into Corridor 7, he said. 3 coalition outposts in the last 4 months. We've been filing it under manageable escalation." He looked at me. Is it manageable? Or have we just not been angry enough about it to address it properly? I thought about Reyes. About 12 people in 72 hours. About a species that looked at impossible conditions and considered them unremarkable. "Sir," I said, "I think the question you actually want to ask is whether the Dreth have any idea what they've started." Terran was quiet for another moment. "And the answer?" "No," I said. "They've been fighting the coalition. They've been calculating our responses and planning accordingly. They think they know how this goes. They haven't fought Earth yet." Terran made a sound that, in his species, functions as grim acknowledgement. "Get me a line to Commander Reyes, and get me everything Earth has on Corridor 7. I got him both. What happened in Corridor 7 over the next 4 months is classified at levels I am not authorized to discuss in full, and I will not pretend otherwise. What I can tell you is this: the Dreth expansion stopped, then it reversed. Then it collapsed in a manner that the Dreth's own historians will likely spend generations trying to explain. The official coalition briefings were careful and measured. They explained the outcome in terms of strategic repositioning and coordinated force application. But I was present for some of the less official conversations. In one of them, late, in a small room, after a long day, a young intelligence officer from the Branthy Union, asked Reyes directly how Earth thought about war. Not tactics, not doctrine. How they thought about it, philosophically. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I wrote down and have not been able to stop thinking about since. Most species go to war to achieve objectives, she said. Territorial, political, economic. When the objective is achieved or becomes unachievable, the war ends. That's rational. That's how it should work. She paused. The problem is that some threats don't respond to rational frameworks. Some things need to be ended completely, not managed or contained. And when that situation comes up, she looked around the room, at all of us. With those precise reading eyes, you need someone who can do that. Someone who's already made peace with what it costs. She leaned back. Earth has a lot of experience with making that kind of peace. The Branthy officer asked her if that was a good thing. Reyes thought about it seriously. I don't know, she said. But it's a real thing, and right now, it's pointed at the right targets. She almost smiled. So let's call it good for now. I retired from active field analysis 8 years after the Calliden mission. I teach now at the Yenthari Institute for Strategic Studies, courses on human military methodology, which remain among the most heavily enrolled in the institution, because every analyst and officer and tactician wants to understand it, and nobody quite does. I start every course the same way. I show them the sensor footage from Calliden Station. 12 humans, 60 hours, 4,000 lives, 0 coalition casualties. And then I tell them, this is not a story about a miracle. It is not a story about exceptional individuals doing exceptional things. It is a story about what happens when you take a species that has been sharpening itself against itself for 8,000 years and give it an external enemy. We spent years trying to assess human military capability by measuring what they could do. We should have been measuring what it would take to stop them. Those are very different questions. The first one gave us metrics that looked average. The second one gave us a number we didn't have a word for. I still don't, entirely. But every commander in the coalition knows it now. It's the number that comes up when someone asks, how long can they keep going? And the answer is always the same. Longer than you need them to. Longer than seems possible. Long enough. The humans don't call themselves warriors. Not usually. They don't make a ceremony of it, the way some species do. They call themselves soldiers, officers, operators, occupational titles, functional descriptions, words that imply a job, something you clock in for, do well, and go home from. I used to find that modest. Now I find it the most unsettling thing about them. Because a warrior is defined by what they are. A soldier is defined by what they do. And what humans do, with a calmness that I have still not fully reconciled, is go into places no one else will go, do things no one else believes can be done, and come out the other side asking if there's a debrief, not asking if everyone made it, not asking if it was worth it, asking when the next one starts. That is not a miracle. Miracles are random. That was a Tuesday. The galaxy spent a long time looking at Earth and seeing a backwater. Slow ships, primitive weapons, messy politics, a species still figuring itself out. We were not wrong about any of that. We were just looking at the wrong things. We should have been looking at what Earth had already survived, what it had already built, what every war they ever fought against themselves had quietly, ruthlessly produced. Not generals, not conquerors, wolves, who learned to wear dress uniforms because it made the work easier. And the thing about wolves, the thing I have come to understand after years of teaching human military methodology to rooms full of analysts who are smarter than I was at their age, is that they do not need to be the biggest animal in the forest. They just need to be the one everything else eventually learns not to corner. Earth didn't send us diplomats. They didn't send us heroes or legends or soldiers from recruiting posters. They sent us 12 people who looked at an impossible situation, made a plan in the time it took the rest of us to find our seats, and got to work. The Dreth thought they knew what kind of war they were fighting. They were wrong about that. Every species that makes the same assumption will be too.